In the chilling winter of 2004, a young woman named Maura Murray seemed to vanish off the face of the earth, leaving behind nothing but fragments of her life that only deepened the mystery. Fragments that to this day refuse to add up into a clear picture, and to understand the haunting puzzle of her disappearance, one has to go back, long before that February night when she was last seen. Back into the life of a girl who was described by those who knew her as driven, intelligent, athletic, and yet, beneath that polished exterior, quietly burdened by secrets and struggles that most never realized, Maura grew up in Hampshire, Massachusetts, the fourth child in a family of 5, a family bound together by love but also complicated by tension. Her father, Fred, was a strict but caring figure, deeply involved in his children's lives, especially when it came to academics and sports, and Maura, with her natural discipline and dedication, seemed to embody the ideal of a bright future, excelling in both athletics and academics. She was a star athlete in high school, a standout in cross-country running, and her determination earned her admission into the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point, a place that demanded grit, intelligence, and resilience, qualities Maura appeared to have in abundance. And yet, even during her time at West Point, cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed image of perfection, because behind her driven persona, Maura seemed to wrestle with internal conflicts that would eventually steer her life down a path full of uncertainty. At West Point, she majored in chemical engineering, a field as demanding as it was respected, but soon, she transferred to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, choosing instead to study nursing. And while on the surface it seemed like just a change in academic direction, to those who looked closely it hinted at a deeper story. A story of a young woman in search of a different path, perhaps struggling with expectations, perhaps yearning for a life that felt more her own. At UMass, she appeared to settle into her new life, sharing a dorm room with friends, working at the campus security desk, and maintaining a relationship with her boyfriend Billy, who was attending West Point. Their relationship, while serious, was not without its complications. Long-distance love always is. And theirs was often marked by miscommunications and small fractures that hinted at deeper strain. Still, to most people, Maura looked like she had her life figured out. A diligent student, a loving girlfriend, a dependable daughter. And yet beneath it all something else was happening, because in the months leading up to her disappearance, subtle but disturbing events began to unfold, moments that when viewed in isolation might seem small, but when placed in the larger timeline, reveal a troubling pattern that suggests Maura's world was far from stable. One of the earliest signs came in the form of legal trouble. Maura was caught using a stolen credit card to order food. The act itself seemed almost trivial, some takeout meals charged to someone else's account. But for Maura, who was typically seen as disciplined and responsible, this was out of character. A strange lapse in judgment that raised questions about her mental state and what stress she might have been under. She was placed on probation, and though the consequences were not life-shattering, the incident served as a shadow over her otherwise promising record. Her friends noted she seemed distracted at times, sometimes distant, sometimes almost weighed down by something unspoken. And then came the mysterious incident at her job, an incident that continues to confound people to this day. Maura was working the night shift at the UMass security desk when she received a phone call that shook her to her core. Nobody knows exactly what was said on the other end, but a supervisor later recalled finding Maura at her desk, pale, frozen, her body trembling, her eyes locked in a kind of blank stare as if she'd just heard something devastating. When asked if she was okay, she could barely respond, eventually leaving her post and being escorted back to her dorm. The details of that call remain one of the many unanswered questions in the case, because whatever words were spoken to her that night, they clearly rattled her in a way that friends and supervisors had never seen before, and while Maura would never explain it, that moment became yet another piece of the puzzle of her unraveling life. The days continued on, and though she tried to maintain her normal routines, her actions hinted at turmoil beneath the surface. She was reportedly involved in a car accident while driving her father's vehicle, crashing it after a night out. Her father, though frustrated, seemed supportive, trying to help her fix the situation. But the crash wasn't just a dented car. It was another mark in a series of strange, unsettling events that seemed to follow Maura in those last weeks. She appeared more secretive, more withdrawn, and yet no one, not even her closest friends or family, could have predicted what was about to happen next. By early February 2004, Maura's life seemed to reach a point of quiet but undeniable chaos. She emailed her professors claiming she would be absent for a week due to a family death, an excuse that was later revealed to be untrue, as no such death had occurred, suggesting she was planning something, perhaps an escape, perhaps just a temporary reprieve from the mounting pressures of her life. She packed some belongings, withdrew money from an ATM, and set off in her black Saturn sedan, leaving behind her dorm room in apparent order, but carrying with her a sense of urgency that has never been fully explained. Nobody knew exactly why she left, nobody knew where she was headed, and nobody knew that within hours. She would vanish, seemingly swallowed whole by the wilderness of New Hampshire. But before we arrive at that chilling night, it is important to sit with the question of who Maura really was, because in many ways, that is at the heart of this mystery. She was a young woman standing on the threshold of adulthood, pulled in different directions by family expectations, romantic entanglements, academic stress, and personal struggles. She was someone who had tasted success and stumbled through mistakes, someone who could smile brightly while hiding a storm within, and perhaps it is this complexity, this inability to fully pin her down, that has made her disappearance one of the most enduring and haunting unsolved cases in modern America. For what makes Maura's case so chilling is not just that she disappeared, but the eerie trail of breadcrumbs she left behind. Breadcrumbs that seemed almost deliberately scattered. Breadcrumbs that both reveal and conceal at the same time. Breadcrumbs that invite endless speculation but resist clear answers. And so part one of this story closes with Maura driving away from her life at UMass, her Saturn sedan carrying her down highways and into uncertainty, the snow-covered roads of New England waiting ahead, her mind filled with thoughts only she knew, and the rest of us left to forever wonder. What was she running from, and more importantly, what was she running toward? The days leading up to Maura Murray's disappearance form a timeline that has been dissected endlessly by investigators, journalists, and internet sleuths alike. Because within those few days lies the haunting sense of inevitability, as if the weight of her struggles and secrets were converging toward some decisive breaking point, and to truly follow her journey, we must retrace her steps from the quiet campus of the University of Massachusetts to the frozen backroads of rural New Hampshire, where her car would eventually be found abandoned. On Thursday, February 5, 2004, just 4 days before she vanished, Maura's life seemed to crack once more under pressure when she borrowed her father's Toyota Corolla to attend a party. After the gathering, she was driving back, perhaps distracted, perhaps exhausted. When she lost control and crashed into a guardrail, the vehicle sustained heavy damage, thousands of dollars worth. Her father was frustrated but more concerned than angry, reassuring her that insurance would help, that it wasn't the end of the world. But for Maura, who had already been under stress from academic and personal issues, this crash was yet another burden she didn't need. And yet, on the surface, she handled it calmly, staying with her father that weekend, shopping for cars with him on Sunday, almost as if nothing unusual was happening. But as hindsight would reveal, this was not a normal weekend for Maura. It was the beginning of something far more ominous, because what followed was a string of decisions and actions that suggest she was planning something quietly, secretly, something that to this day no one fully understands. After the crash, she returned to campus and resumed her job at the UMass security desk, where her supervisor still recalled that chilling moment just days earlier when Maura had been reduced to silence after a mysterious phone call, the nature of which has never been revealed. Her friends and coworkers began to notice she was distracted, not quite herself. And then, on Monday, February 9, she emailed her professors and work supervisors, informing them that she would be absent for the next week due to a death in the family. This was a lie. There had been no death, and it raises one of the central mysteries of the case. Why did Maura fabricate this excuse? Was she simply buying herself time away from campus responsibilities, or was she preparing to vanish altogether? That same day, she also made a series of curious preparations. She used an ATM to withdraw $280, nearly all the cash she had in her account. She then stopped at a liquor store, purchasing alcohol including a box of Franzia wine, Kahlua, and other beverages. She also made a call to a condominium complex in Bartlett, New Hampshire, an area she and her family were familiar with from past trips. But no reservations were ever confirmed, suggesting perhaps she had been considering going there, but changed her mind. Her internet search history also revealed that she had looked up directions to various places in northern New England, including the White Mountains, an area she was familiar with from family vacations and hiking trips. Her actions pointed toward some kind of getaway, a self-imposed break from her life. But whether that getaway was meant to be temporary or permanent is a question that continues to haunt this case. After gathering her things, she loaded her black Saturn sedan with her belongings, including clothing, toiletries, and academic materials. But what she chose to pack and what she left behind only deepened the sense of mystery. She took some personal items but left behind others, including sentimental belongings one might not expect to abandon if planning to run away forever. She even packed textbooks for nursing courses, suggesting she intended to return to school. This contradiction has fueled countless theories. Was she planning only a short break, or did she intend to disappear for good and change her life entirely? By mid-afternoon on February 9, Maura was on the road, driving north out of Amherst, away from her dorm room, away from her friends, away from everything familiar. As the day wore on, she traveled along the highways of Massachusetts, crossing into New Hampshire, and eventually making her way toward the remote backroads that cut through the White Mountains. The drive itself is crucial to understanding her mindset, because witnesses later reported that she did not appear panicked or rushed. She stopped at ATMs, she stopped at a liquor store, she made phone calls. Her actions were deliberate, calm, almost as if she had a plan, but then again, there were contradictions. She never told her family where she was going. She never confided in her boyfriend Billy. She never left a note of explanation. She simply disappeared from her known life and drove off into the unknown. Somewhere along the route, she placed a call to her boyfriend's cell phone, leaving a message that suggested nothing alarming. Simply, "I love you." Words that in hindsight feel loaded with mystery. Were they routine words of affection, or a veiled goodbye? Later that evening, as the sun set and the temperature dropped, Maura was still driving north, the landscape growing more isolated, the roads more narrow and winding, snow lining the edges of the asphalt. Her Saturn eventually made its way onto Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, a rural stretch of road surrounded by woods and dotted with only the occasional house. It was here, on this lonely road, that the most enduring and haunting part of the mystery would unfold. But before her car came to a stop in that fateful spot, there is the question that has obsessed countless researchers. What exactly was she seeking in the North Country? Some speculate she was running away from the pressures of school, her legal troubles, her relationship struggles, her father's expectations. Others suggest she may have been fleeing toward something, perhaps a rendezvous with a secret person, or perhaps simply toward peace and solitude, the chance to clear her head in the quiet mountains. What we know for certain is that Maura drove alone that night, and by 7:27 p.m., she would be seen for the very last time, standing beside her crashed vehicle on Route 112, a dark figure against the snow, a figure that would soon vanish into the night, leaving behind one of the greatest modern mysteries in American true crime. But as Part 2 draws to a close, what we are left with is a portrait of a young woman quietly unraveling, taking steps that seem calculated and yet shrouded in ambiguity. Her withdrawal of cash, her purchase of alcohol, her fabricated excuse to professors, her packing of both casual and academic items, all suggest planning. And yet none of it tells us why. None of it explains the choice to head north into isolation. None of it illuminates what awaited her at the end of that road. All it does is set the stage for the chilling moment when Maura's car would be found abandoned, her presence lingering only in fragments, an airbag deployed, a box of wine spilled, and no sign of the young woman who had so carefully orchestrated her escape. And so as we move forward, the timeline narrows, the hours tick down, and Maura Murray's fate draws closer to the moment when the world would lose her forever into the darkness of rural New Hampshire. The night of February 9, 2004, was bitterly cold in the small town of Haverhill, New Hampshire. The kind of night when darkness descends quickly and the silence of snow-covered woods presses heavily against the backroads. And along Route 112, also known as the Wild Ammonoosuc Road, a single black Saturn sedan carrying 21-year-old Maura Murray wound its way down the rural highway, headlights cutting through the icy air. Sometime after 7 p.m., the car veered off the road on a sharp curve near the weathered barn, striking a snowbank and spinning to a stop, its front end damaged, its airbags deployed. A scene that suggested an accident, but one with unsettling undertones. For it was here, at this lonely stretch of road, that Maura would be seen for the last time. Moments that have since been scrutinized endlessly by investigators and armchair detectives desperate to reconstruct her final movements. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a local school bus driver named Butch Atwood came upon the scene. Seeing the Saturn with its hazard lights blinking faintly in the dark, Maura stood outside the car, bundled against the cold. Appearing shaken but not injured, Atwood stopped his bus and offered help, asking if she needed him to call the police or summon roadside assistance, but Maura politely declined, telling him she had already called AAA. Though records later confirmed no such call was ever made, she insisted she didn't need help, her demeanor calm but firm. Atwood later recalled that she didn't appear drunk, though there was an odor of alcohol, possibly from the spilled box of wine in her car. He found her behavior odd, as if she were in a hurry to be left alone. Atwood, suspecting she might be in trouble, returned home and phoned the police at 7:43 p.m. Reporting the accident, within minutes, another witness, a neighbor across the street, noticed the Saturn stopped awkwardly on the road, its hazard lights blinking. The neighbor glanced out intermittently but didn't see Maura clearly, only the vehicle. And then, sometime between 7:30 and 7:46, in a span of no more than 15 minutes, Maura vanished. By the time the first officer, Sergeant Cecil Smith, arrived at the scene at 7:46 p.m., the Saturn sat abandoned, the driver nowhere in sight, the car was locked, the airbags deployed, and inside were some of Maura's belongings. A box of wine partially spilled, a soda bottle that smelled strongly of alcohol, clothing, toiletries, schoolwork, and her favorite stuffed animal. But her debit card, cell phone, and most personal items were missing, suggesting she had taken them with her when she left the vehicle. The officer searched the area but found no footprints leading away into the snow. No sign of a struggle, nothing to suggest where she might have gone. It was as if she had stepped off the earth itself, one moment standing beside her crashed car, the next swallowed by the darkness. The investigation that followed in those first crucial hours has been criticized for its handling. Some say the search was too limited, others that police assumed too quickly she was simply a runaway adult. But whatever the reason, the immediate aftermath only deepened the mystery. Sergeant Smith initially believed the scene suggested a drunk driver who had fled to avoid detection. After all, the spilled alcohol, the strange calmness Maura displayed when refusing help, and her disappearance all pointed toward someone hiding from legal trouble. But as hours turned to days and Maura never returned, that simple theory began to unravel. For if she had just wandered off into the woods to avoid police, why had she never been found? Why had she never made contact with family? And why had there been no trace of her in the snow? Those questions still echo 20 years later. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Atwood remained firm in his statement that she had been alone, polite but insistent on refusing help. Neighbors reported no sign of anyone walking along the road, no vehicles picking her up, no sound of struggle, nothing but the silent blinking of her hazards. And yet somehow in those crucial minutes, she was gone. Investigators began combing the area, deploying search dogs that traced her scent only briefly, from the car and down the road for about 100 yards before losing it entirely. The trail simply vanished. Some theorized she had been picked up by another vehicle. Others believed she had fled deep into the woods where she succumbed to the elements, though no body was ever found despite extensive searches. As dawn broke the next morning, the Saturn was towed and the search expanded. Helicopters scanned the treetops, volunteers combed the underbrush, bloodhounds sniffed through drifts of snow. But Maura was nowhere, not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, not a single confirmed clue to indicate her fate. The car itself became a focal point of speculation, its contents analyzed for meaning, the alcohol, the packed belongings, the lack of obvious evidence of injury, all of it raising questions. Had she intended to drink heavily and escape her problems? Or was the alcohol merely incidental? Had she been planning to meet someone? Or had she simply been driving aimlessly toward solitude? What unsettled investigators most was the speed with which she disappeared. A window of perhaps 10 to 15 minutes, in a rural area with little traffic. Where could she have gone so quickly and without being seen? Police canvassed nearby homes, checked local motels, scoured bus stations, but no credible sightings emerged. Meanwhile, her family was alerted. Her father, Fred, rushing to New Hampshire in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the picture of his disciplined, determined daughter with the baffling reality of her disappearance. Her boyfriend Billy was notified, devastated, left with only the haunting voicemail she had left earlier that day, telling him she loved him, a message that now felt like a farewell. And yet it offered no answers, only pain. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation grew colder. Theories multiplied, and media attention began to swirl around the case, painting Maura as both a troubled young woman and a tragic victim. But in those first nights, in those crucial hours when she might have been found, she slipped away into mystery, leaving behind a car in the snow, a series of lies and half-truths, and a trail of evidence that seemed designed to confuse, not clarify. And so the immediate aftermath of her disappearance remains the most haunting part of the story. Because it is here, in the silence of a snow-covered road, that the mystery of Maura Murray crystallized forever. How does a young woman simply vanish in the span of minutes? In plain sight, with no trace, no scream, no struggle, just the endless night and the endless questions that followed. In the days immediately following Maura Murray's disappearance, the small community of Haverhill, New Hampshire, became the epicenter of a mystery that refused to yield answers. And as word spread, search efforts expanded in intensity and scope. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the frozen landscape. State police units canvassed every possible path she might have taken, and volunteers trudged through the woods, their boots sinking into knee-deep snow as they called her name into the silence. But nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no broken branches, emerged to indicate where she had gone. Search dogs initially picked up her scent near the abandoned Saturn and followed it for about 100 yards east down Route 112, before losing it abruptly, as if Maura had either entered a vehicle or the scent was interrupted. And this discovery gave rise to one of the dominant theories of her case, that she had willingly or unwillingly gotten into a car with another person that night. But who that person was, and what their intentions might have been, remain questions shrouded in speculation. Law enforcement quickly realized this was no ordinary missing persons case, and because Maura was a legal adult, there was hesitation at first. Some officers theorized she had simply chosen to run away, pointing to her lies about a death in the family, her purchase of alcohol, and her decision to leave Amherst without telling anyone. But her family rejected that idea outright, insisting that Maura would never cut ties so abruptly without explanation. Her father, Fred, became the loudest voice demanding answers, criticizing what he felt were missteps in the early investigation, such as the lack of immediate K-9 units on the night she vanished, the delay in treating the scene as potentially criminal, and the absence of checkpoints on local roads in those first critical hours. To Fred Murray, time was wasted, time that might have saved his daughter's life, and his frustration only grew as days turned into weeks without a single credible lead. As investigators dug deeper into Maura's life, more strange details emerged. some of which painted a picture of a young woman under enormous strain. They learned of her probation for credit card fraud, her recent car crash in her father's vehicle, her odd behavior at the UMass security desk, her fabricated story about a family death, and the belongings she had packed in her car, all of which seemed to suggest she had been preparing to step away from her life. But how far she had intended to step, and whether she had help, remained unclear. One of the most puzzling aspects was the condition of her car. Inside they found not only her textbooks and clothing, but also printed directions to Burlington, Vermont, a place she had considered driving toward, though her actual route took her to New Hampshire. Investigators also noted the box of wine that had spilled during the crash, soaking parts of the car, a sign that she had been drinking or at least transporting alcohol for reasons unknown. In the backseat they found her stuffed animal, a sentimental item she always carried, its presence both heartbreaking and perplexing. Why bring it if she intended never to return? And why leave it behind if she had plans to start over? Law enforcement pursued multiple leads. One theory was that she had succumbed to the freezing temperatures after leaving her car, but exhaustive ground and air searches never uncovered a body, not even a trace of fabric or belongings. Another theory was that she had been abducted, possibly by a passerby who offered assistance. The fact that her scent trail ended so suddenly lent credibility to the idea that she had entered another vehicle. But who in that isolated stretch of road would have crossed paths with her in that narrow time window? Police questioned locals, canvassed sex offenders in the area, and followed up on tips, but nothing concrete emerged. Meanwhile, her father Fred grew more vocal, appearing in media interviews, organizing his own searches, and insisting his daughter was the victim of foul play. He rejected the notion of voluntary disappearance, claiming Maura had been planning her future, that she had even printed nursing textbooks to continue her studies. To him, the idea that she had simply run away made no sense. And yet, investigators could not ignore the inconsistencies in her final days, fueling a tension between law enforcement and family that persists even now. As weeks turned into months, the case drew national attention. Major outlets picked up the story, comparing Maura's disappearance to other infamous cases of young women vanishing without a trace. Internet forums sprang up dedicated entirely to theorizing about her fate. And for the first time, the digital age of true crime obsession took root in her story. Thousands of strangers dissecting every detail, every rumor, every piece of evidence. Some believed she had ended her own life, overwhelmed by the mounting pressures of her world. Others believed she had staged her disappearance, fleeing to start over somewhere new, while many insisted she had met with foul play, perhaps abducted by a stranger or even someone she knew. But through it all, not a shred of concrete evidence emerged to prove any of it. In later years, cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar were used on properties near the crash site. One house in particular, less than 100 yards from where the Saturn was found, drew suspicion. Search dogs had allegedly reacted strongly near the home's foundation, yet initial searches found nothing. Years later, in 2019, state investigators returned with ground-penetrating radar to examine the basement. But again, no conclusive evidence was found. This house remains a point of heated debate among those who follow the case. Some convinced it hides the truth, others dismissing it as coincidence. As the investigation continued, law enforcement faced a problem common in long-term missing persons cases. The flood of false leads, psychics offered visions, Strangers claimed sightings of Maura in far-flung places, from Canada to Connecticut, but none held up under scrutiny. Every lead turned to smoke. Every potential break in the case evaporated into frustration. Meanwhile, her family's grief deepened. Her father, Fred, became relentless, returning to New Hampshire countless times, walking the roads, handing out flyers, speaking with anyone who might have seen something that night. His dedication became almost synonymous with the case itself. The image of a father who refused to stop searching, refused to let his daughter's story fade. And yet, despite his efforts and the combined work of police, private investigators, journalists, and internet sleuths, the truth of what happened in those woods remains hidden. What makes this part of the story so chilling is not just the lack of answers, but the sense that answers should exist. After all, Maura vanished on a road with houses nearby. She vanished in a narrow window of time between when she was last seen and when the police arrived. She vanished, leaving behind a car filled with belongings. And yet somehow, with all of that, the trail goes cold almost instantly. It is this contradiction, abundant clues yet no resolution, that has kept her case alive in public consciousness for 2 decades. For every detail seems meaningful and meaningless at the same time. Every clue points in multiple directions, and every theory collapses under scrutiny. And so Part 4 closes with a portrait of a case that refuses to give up its secrets. A case where search dogs, helicopters, police canvases, and national media attention all failed to uncover a single definitive lead. Where suspicion fell on neighbors, on strangers, even on Maura herself, but always with no proof, no closure, only silence. And that silence continues to haunt not just her family, but anyone who dares to stare too long into the mystery of Maura Murray. The mystery of Maura Murray's disappearance became more than just a family's tragedy. It evolved into one of the most widely debated unsolved cases in America, with theories so varied, conflicting, and sensational that nearly everyone who encountered the story seemed to walk away with a different conclusion. At its core, the enduring obsession with Maura's case comes down to one haunting fact: she simply vanished. No body, no confirmed sightings, no solid evidence of foul play, and no indisputable proof that she left voluntarily. This vacuum of truth created a breeding ground for speculation, internet sleuthing, media documentaries, and even accusations. And nearly 2 decades later, the mystery still feels just as unsolved as it did on that cold night in February 2004. One of the earliest theories, pushed by some investigators and adopted by many skeptics, was that Maura had staged her disappearance to start a new life. Supporters of this theory pointed to the evidence that she had packed belongings from her dorm room, including cosmetics and academic materials, as though she did not plan to return right away. She had also withdrawn nearly all the money from her bank account and purchased alcohol, which led some to believe she was either preparing for a personal getaway or even contemplating suicide. The detail that she had emailed her professors and bosses, telling them she would be away due to a family emergency that did not actually exist, also raised questions. Did Maura have a secret plan to vanish into anonymity? Was she attempting to escape the pressures of school, family, and her relationship with Billy? But as this theory gained traction, it faced resistance from those who knew Maura best. Her family firmly rejected the idea that she would ever abandon them, especially without a word, and they argued that her behavior in the days prior was not consistent with someone plotting a new life. Moreover, if her plan had been to disappear on her own terms, Why choose such a dangerous and exposed way of doing so? Crashing her car on a rural road in sub-freezing temperatures with no safe haven nearby. The staged disappearance theory never fully satisfied the logical gaps in the timeline. The second major theory was far darker, that Maura fell victim to foul play. The stretch of Route 112, where her Saturn was found, was remote but not completely deserted, and locals pointed out that it would not have been unusual for someone with malicious intent to pass by that night. The fact that she was last seen standing alone by her car in the cold and then disappeared within minutes suggested to many that someone had picked her up, whether she accepted the ride willingly or not. A stranger abduction was possible, though skeptics argued it would have been an extraordinary coincidence for a predator to be present at the exact moment her car accident occurred. Some believed foul play might not have come from a stranger at all, but from someone Maura already knew. Could a local resident have offered her help, only to take advantage of the situation? The mystery deepened when investigators discovered that convicted criminals and sex offenders had lived near the crash site. Yet, despite extensive interviews, no concrete link was ever established. Another possible explanation, one that has lingered on the fringes of discussion, is that Maura wandered into the woods to avoid detection or to find shelter, only to succumb to the cold. New Hampshire winters are brutal, with temperatures dropping dangerously low at night, and Maura was lightly dressed. Search teams used dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging to comb the area, but they found no sign of her, not even footprints that could be confirmed as hers. For many, the lack of physical evidence so close to the accident site rules out the wandered-off theory, yet others argue that snow and time could have erased crucial traces. Theories soon expanded beyond logical bounds. Some online sleuths proposed that Maura's case was linked to other disappearances in the New England region, forming what they claimed was a pattern of serial abductions. Others speculated that the family knew more than they were admitting, though such theories were painful for the Murrays and often based on little more than innuendo. The internet age fueled this fire, with forums like web sleuths and dedicated blogs dissecting every known detail. Amateur detectives analyzed timelines, Google Maps images, phone records, and even Maura's personal emails, often drawing conclusions that contradicted one another. For every person convinced that Maura ran away, there was another certain she was murdered, and another insisting she died in the woods that very night. The case gained mainstream attention in the years after her disappearance. Television shows like Disappeared on Investigation Discovery and podcasts like Missing Maura Murray brought the mystery into living rooms across America. Journalists revisited the story repeatedly, drawn to its eerie lack of closure. Each new wave of coverage rekindled public debate, and Maura became a symbol of both unsolved crime and the limits of modern investigation. The fact that she was young, attractive, and a college student amplified the attention, sparking conversations about how media selects which missing persons cases to elevate into national consciousness. One of the most controversial developments came in 2017, when cadaver dogs allegedly alerted to the scent of human remains in the basement of a nearby home, less than half a mile from where Maura's car was found. The discovery reignited interest and suspicion, but when ground-penetrating radar was used and the property was later excavated, no remains were located. The false lead devastated the family and reminded the public just how fragile hope could be in such cases. Fred Murray, Maura's father, has never stopped searching for answers. Year after year, he has pressed authorities to dig deeper, convinced that his daughter met with foul play. He has criticized law enforcement for what he views as a lack of urgency in the early stages of the investigation, and he continues to attend vigils and speak out publicly, keeping Maura's name alive. For her siblings, the mystery is both a wound and a responsibility. They continue to appeal to anyone who might hold even the smallest piece of information to come forward. As the years have passed, new technologies have given hope that someday the truth will surface. Advances in forensic science, including the ability to analyze trace evidence and digital data with unprecedented precision, may one day provide answers that were unreachable in 2004. Until then, Maura's case remains suspended between fact and speculation, reality and myth. What is undeniable is the cultural footprint the case has left. Maura Murray has become more than just a missing person. She is a story, a question mark, a riddle that the internet generation adopted as its own. Her disappearance was one of the first true crime mysteries to explode online, predating the era of viral podcasts and binge-worthy documentaries. In many ways, she was the beginning of a movement, a tragic catalyst for the online true crime obsession that continues to thrive today. And yet, at the heart of all the theories, debates, and sensational coverage, there remains a very real family who lost their daughter, their sister, their loved one. Behind every headline, every podcast episode, every internet post dissecting her life and last moments, there is grief, confusion, and an unhealed wound. The cold truth is that for all the attention the case has received, for all the speculation and theorizing, Maura's fate is still unknown. As of today, Maura Murray has been missing for over 19 years. Her disappearance stands as one of the most haunting cold cases in America, a chilling reminder of how someone can vanish in the blink of an eye and leave behind only questions. Did she run away to start fresh? Did she encounter a predator on that lonely road? Did she wander into the wilderness and succumb to the cold? Or is there an explanation no one has yet considered? Until the day new evidence emerges, the mystery of Maura Murray will remain a ghost story of modern times, echoing through podcasts, documentaries, and internet forums, but most of all through the hearts of her family, who continue to wait for the truth that has eluded them for nearly 2 decades.